Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 spooky encounters in Texas state parks. That will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. The first time Nathan ever heard the sound, he assumed it was wind. A sharp, high-pitched whistle cutting through the pine trees like a razor. But as he stood still on the edge of the trail, his hiking boots pressing into the soft loam, he realized it wasn't the wind. Not really. The wind didn't rise and fall like that, didn't pulse with something almost human. It was like someone screaming, dozens of them, from far off in the woods, maybe deeper than anyone should be able to go. He didn't tell his wife. Heather was already nervous about this little trip. She didn't like camping, didn't like bugs or dirt or snakes or anything that makes a weird sound when you shine a flashlight at it, as she'd put it. But Nathan had convinced her. Huntsville State Park would be quiet, peaceful, and full of fresh air. The perfect getaway from Houston's noise and stress. He promised it would be romantic. Just them, a tent, and nature. They had picked Site 52, tucked into a more isolated patch of the park. The ranger at the station gave them a weird look when they signed in. "No one's been back in those woods for a while," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Stormed down some trees. But if you're good with a little overgrowth, shouldn't be a problem." Nathan smiled. "We're good." The first night was uneventful. Cold, but not too cold. The frogs sang and a few owls called now and then. They roasted hot dogs over a fire, drank a couple beers, and even laughed about the time they got lost in the mall parking garage for an hour. It was nice, normal, but that night, Nathan woke up at 2:13 a.m. sharp. He knew the time because the glowing green numbers on his watch stared back at him the moment his eyes opened. His heart was pounding, but he hadn't had a nightmare. There had been no dream, just the screaming dot. At first, it was distant, thin, like wind whistling through cracks in a cabin. Then it grew louder, more distinct. Multiple voices, not quite. Words, but close. It sounded like pain, like fear, like people running and being caught. A low moaning undercurrent gave way to high, strangled howls that came in bursts, like someone being torn apart in stages. He reached over to wake Heather, but her sleeping bag was cold. Empty. Nathan threw himself out of the tent and looked around. His breath smoked in the cold air. The fire had died down to red coals. The woods loomed tall around the clearing, the pine trees like dark fingers pointing at the sky. That's when he saw the movement. A figure, maybe 20 feet into the trees, just barely visible in the moonlight. "Heather?" He called out. The figure didn't respond. It didn't even move at first. Then slowly, too slowly, it turned its head toward him. Nathan stepped back. Something was wrong with the shape. It was tall like Heather, but too thin. The limbs hung strange, and the face, he couldn't see it clearly, but the outline of the head looked wrong, elongated, warped. He turned on his flashlight and aimed it toward the figure. Nothing was there. The beam lit up empty forest, trees swaying gently. In the breeze, the pine needles rustled, but there was no figure. No sound of running. No crunch of leaves or twigs. Nathan called for Heather again, panic rising now. A giggle answered him. It came from behind. He spun around and saw her standing near the fire. Kit, arms wrapped around herself, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Where the hell were you?" he asked, voice sharper than he meant. Heather just shrugged. "Bathroom. There's no bathroom out here," he said. She blinked. Smiled again. "Then I guess I didn't go." Something about the way she said it, too calm, too rehearsed, made Nathan's stomach twist. He didn't press it. Not yet. He lay back down in the tent, pretending to fall asleep. But he stayed awake, watching her silhouette beside him. That night, she didn't breathe. He listened. Watched the steady rise and fall of her body in the dark, but there was no sound. No inhale, no exhale. It was like she was miming sleep, pretending. And when he leaned closer, heart hammering in his throat, her eyes opened, wide, white, staring right at him. "I like the trees," she whispered. "They're always screaming." Nathan recoiled, hit the back of the tent. "What did you say?" But she was already asleep again. Back turned, breathing now, like nothing had happened. The next day, Nathan tried to get her to leave. She resisted. "We haven't even gone to the lake yet," she said. "You said we'd hike around the whole park. Let's stay one more night." He couldn't shake the unease. Couldn't stop hearing that phrase echo in his head. "They're always screaming." That night, it got worse. He woke again at 2:13 a.m. Heather was gone again. This time, there were drag marks outside the tent. 2 parallel grooves in the dirt, like heels being pulled. They vanished into the trees. Nathan followed. The screaming came louder the deeper he went. Sometimes it was close, right behind him. Other times it was far away, as if echoing from beneath the ground. The pines closed in tight, their needles brushing his shoulders. The moonlight barely touched the forest floor. Then he saw it. A clearing ringed with old, blackened trees. Burned scars ran up their trunks like claw marks. In the middle stood Heather. Or something wearing her face. It turned to him slowly. Smiled. Wide. Too wide. "She's gone now," it said in her voice, but not her tone. It was deeper, like multiple voices overlapping. "She's one of us." Nathan tried to run, but the trees moved. They twisted, blocking his path. Pines that had stood still for 100 years now bent and stretched like arms. "She liked the screaming," the thing said. "She screamed for hours, but it's your turn now." Nathan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Not a scream. Not a breath. The trees closed in. One branch wrapped around his ankle, another around his neck. And then he did scream, but the sound was swallowed by the forest. Eaten by the wind. 2 weeks later, hikers found their campsite. Empty. Tent collapsed. Gear untouched. They found 2 sets of footprints, one leading away, one dragged, but they vanished in the pines. Locals still say you can hear screaming if you camp too, deep in Huntsville State Park. Some say it's the wind, but those who listen closely know better. The pines don't whistle. They wail. The first time Eddie saw it, he thought it was just a trick of the sun. He had hiked Pedernales Falls dozens of times before, ever since he was a teenager growing up in nearby Johnson City. The place was more than just rocks and water to him. It was home in the way something old and unchanging can feel like it's part of your blood. He knew the trails, the bends in the river, the sound the cypress trees made when the wind cut through them just right. But that morning in early October, when the leaves had just begun to curl and die, he noticed something different. There was a shadow that didn't belong. It was a cool morning, sun low and sharp in the sky. He had taken the Wolf Mountain Trail. purely to beat the heat and clear his head. Ever since his divorce was finalized, he'd taken to hiking more often. Solitude helped. The trees didn't judge, and the water didn't care who had custody of the kids. He was halfway down a switchback, the kind with loose stone that always threatened to twist your ankle if you weren't careful, when he noticed it. His own shadow stretched long and thin ahead of him. But beside it, just to the left, was another one, almost the same size. Almost the same shape. At first, he thought someone was behind him. He turned quickly, but no one was there. The trail was empty. He looked back down, and it was gone. He laughed it off. Must have been a tree branch, or maybe a trick of the terrain. Shadows played games in this kind of light, but that was just the beginning. By the time he reached the falls, he felt watched. There wasn't another soul around. No hikers. No kids climbing on the limestone slabs. No voices bouncing off the rock faces. Just the sound of moving water, soft and steady like a whisper. He walked out onto one of the dry sections. A wide, flat stone that jutted out above a calm pool. The water here was slow, glassy, and deep. The kind of place that made you want to lie down and forget your name for a while. But as he looked down, he saw it again, a shadow, right next to his, standing still, perfectly still. Eddie froze. Shadow didn't move, didn't shift, didn't ripple with the water or sway with the breeze. It just stood there, right beside his own. It wasn't his. The head was shaped wrong, too tall, too narrow at the chin. The arms were longer than they should have been. And the fingers were like roots, thin and twisting, reaching almost to its knees. He turned again. Still nothing behind him. He stepped back. The shadow stayed. He moved left. The shadow stayed. It didn't follow. It just stayed rooted to the water. He took off running. He didn't remember how he got back to the parking lot. His heart was hammering, his mouth dry as sand. The trail seemed longer, steeper, as if it didn't want him to leave. And always he felt the presence behind him, not following with sound, but with pressure, with weight, like a second set of eyes pushing into the back of his skull. That night, he dreamed of it. He stood on the falls again, but this time the sky was black and starless. The water was still, but the reflection was wrong. In it, his face wasn't his. It was stretched, hollow. Something thin and long crouched behind him in the reflection, its arms wrapped around his chest like barbed wire. He woke up screaming, sheet-soaked, mouth tasting of salt and blood. He didn't go back to the park for a week, but the shadow did. It started showing up in his backyard. Only at night, when the porch light flickered, a second shadow beside his own on the fence, or across the lawn when he stepped outside for a smoke. It never moved, never shifted. Just stood there, waiting. He started staying inside. Curtains drawn, lights on. But sometimes, even in the safety of his living room, he saw it in the corners, in mirrors, in reflections in the TV screen when it was off. It never had a face, just a shape, just arms too long and a body too still. Eddie tried. Drinking it away, tried pills, talked to a therapist who suggested sleepwalking, unresolved trauma, maybe even hallucinations. But none of that explained what happened next, because one morning, his neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, who always waved to him and brought him fresh cookies on holidays, was found dead in her garden. Her body twisted, spine snapped backward like she'd been yanked up and dropped. Her mouth wide open in a scream, eyes frozen in terror. Eddie didn't see it happen. But he knew. Somehow, he knew. It was the shadow, and it was getting closer. He found claw marks on his door. Not scratches. Claws, long, deep gouges in the wood. His cat, which never left his room, was found flayed on the back porch, skin peeled like an orange. The word mine was etched into the fur left behind. He packed a bag, drove 3 hours to Austin, got a motel, but the shadow came anyway. Followed him down I-35, past gas stations and fast food joints, through concrete and steel. It showed up in the parking lot as he stepped out of his car. It was there in the window when he brushed his teeth. It watched from the shower curtain as he bathed it. Wanted something. But he didn't know what so he went back to Pedernales. He thought maybe if he returned it, gave it what it wanted, it would stop. Maybe it was a place thing. Maybe the land had eyes and mouths and old, buried things that should never have been disturbed. Maybe he had stepped wrong, spoken too loudly, left his scent where it didn't belong. He hiked the same trail. No water this time, no food. Just the sound of wind and his own labored breathing. He made it to the same spot, the same rock above. The still pool and it was there not just the shadow. The thing itself it rose from the water like smoke, like ink spilled across the air. Tall and skeletal, made of sinew and hollowness. Eyes that weren't eyes but holes into something deeper. Something that hated light, that hated warmth. It didn't speak. It didn't have to. Eddie understood now it had followed. But not because it was chasing him, because it had attached. Eddie was its new body, its ride, its flesh suit. And it wasn't done with him. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was his own reflection in the water, but it wasn't him. The thing had taken over, wore his face like a mask, walked in his skin like a man wears clothes, and the real Eddie, the thinking, breathing part, sank down beneath the surface. A hiker found his pack a week later, full of clothes, wallet still inside, car abandoned. No body, no blood. Just a perfect pair of footprints leading to the water's edge, and a second, longer sat right beside them. Sometimes now, campers near Pedernales report strange things. A man who waves from the trees with fingers too long. Shadows that don't match the body. Reflections that move when you don't. They say he's still there, or at least something wearing him is. The desert plays tricks on your mind. That's what everyone says before they go out to Big Bend for the first time. It's the heat, they say, and the isolation. The way the rocks shimmer in the sun like they're breathing. The long stretches of nothing, where time feels stretched thin, like old taffy being pulled to the point of snapping. Todd didn't believe in any of that crap. He was a geologist after all. Logic, measurements, carbon dating, those were his truths. He'd been out to Big Bend 5 times in the last 10 years, and each time it was more beautiful than he remembered. Quiet, stark, unforgiving. Just the kind of place he liked to be alone. He didn't do well around people anymore. Not since the accident. He never talked about the accident, not with the therapists. Not with his ex-wife. Not even with himself. This trip was supposed to be simple. 5 days, solo. Document a few eroded basalt formations near Ernst-Hinaja and collect mineral samples near the canyons. Camp out under the stars, make a few notes, and return to San Antonio like nothing happened. He arrived on a Monday, checked in with the rangers, and parked his truck at a primitive campsite about half a mile off the gravel road. No cell service, no tourists. Just the wind and the hum of the desert. The first day went smoothly. He found a stunning set of rock outcroppings weathered by time and temperature swings. Took photos, bagged samples. The sun went down behind the mountains, casting long shadows that reached for him like dark fingers. And the night settled in heavy. It was sometime around midnight when he heard the first sound. A ticking. Soft at first, like an old watch winding backward. He sat up in his sleeping bag, listening. The desert is never truly silent. Insects buzz. Coyotes howl in the distance, but this was different, mechanical, repetitive. He got out of the tent and stood barefoot on the hard, dry ground. The stars above looked fake, too sharp, too numerous, like they'd been painted on a canvas that was starting to peel. The ticking was louder now. It was coming from somewhere behind his tent, toward the rocks. He turned on his flashlight and swept it across the darkness. Nothing. The next morning, he found something odd. His watch had stopped at 2:17 a.m. dead. Brand new battery. And it had frozen solid. He brushed it off. Maybe the battery was faulty. He reset it and moved on. But the second night, things got worse. He was sleeping, dreaming something strange. A loop of him walking endlessly through a canyon that folded in on itself. When he woke up in a cold sweat, it was pitch black. Inside the tent, he reached for his flashlight, but it wasn't there. Neither was his phone. Panicking, he crawled to the entrance of the tent and unzipped it. What he saw outside didn't make sense. It was daylight, not sunrise. Not early morning. Full, blinding daylight. He blinked several times, rubbed his eyes. Checked his watch again, 2:17 a.m. again. He stepped outside, looked around. His truck was gone. The campsite looked abandoned. Not messy, just like no one had ever been there. His cooler was missing. The fire pit looked old, half filled with sand and wind-blown debris. No footprints. No tire tracks. It was like he'd been gone for months. He walked to the edge of a rise and looked out across the desert. The land was the same, but wrong. It felt quieter than it should have. The air had a thickness to it, like the sky was pressing down. He saw no birds, no bugs, not even the usual shimmer of heat, just stillness. And then he saw the figure. Far in the distance, near a set of tall, jagged rocks, someone stood, or maybe something. It was black against the pale backdrop. Tall, thin. It didn't move, didn't sway, just stood, watching. Todd called out. His voice echoed once, twice, then stopped as if something swallowed the sound. The figure remained. He grabbed his gear, what little he had left, and started toward it. He needed answers. Maybe it was another camper. Maybe he was having a heat stroke. Maybe he was finally losing it. He walked for what felt like hours, but the sun didn't move. The light never changed. The figure never got closer. Eventually, the figure turned and walked into the rock. Not around it, not behind it, into a dot like the stone had opened for it. Todd ran. He reached the rocks, out of breath and shaking, and searched every crevice. There was no entrance, no sign of passage, but there was a sound. A low hum, deep in the stone, like a generator buried far below the surface. The rocks were warm. Not from the sun, they pulsed with heat, like something alive. He pressed his hand against the surface, and the world turned upside down. He was falling, or spinning, or unraveling. Images hit him like freight trains, memories he didn't recognize, places he'd never been, people he'd never met. He saw a woman scream without sound, a dog with 3 eyes, a clock melting into sand. Then his own face, but twisted, older, eyes sunken and black. Then everything went black. He woke up inside his tent. It was night again. He gasped, sat up. Everything was where it should be. Cooler, fire pit, truck keys, flashlight. His watch. Read 11:09 p.m. He thought he dreamed it all, but then he saw his boots, covered in red, dust he hadn't seen on the trail. And on the inside of his right boot, tucked in just under the tongue, was a note. Old paper, crumbling, with one word written in blocky, childlike handwriting, stay. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, He packed up and drove out. Didn't say a word to the ranger. Didn't look back. But something had followed him. He hears the ticking now, even in San Antonio. Sometimes when the TV is off. Sometimes just before he drifts to sleep. Always at 2:17 a.m., he started forgetting things. His neighbor's name, where he parked, his own birthday once. Then came the blackouts, small at first. A few minutes. Then hours. One time, he lost a whole day. Found himself standing on the shoulder of I-10, with no idea how he got there. Doctors say it's stress, but he knows better. There's something in Big Bend, something old. Something that exists outside of time. A place where minutes stretch and twist and snap. A place where reality thins and lets other things bleed through. Something marked him there, and now time doesn't belong to him anymore, it belongs to them. The first time Shelby ever went into Longhorn Cavern, she was 11. It was a class trip. She remembered the smell first, wet stone and something deeper, something that didn't belong above ground. Not quite rot, not quite mold. Something older, something patient. Even back then, with a helmet too big for her head and a flashlight she couldn't stop shaking, she had felt it, the pressure, the knowing. As if something hidden beneath the earth had opened one eye for a second, just to notice her. Years passed. She forgot about the cavern, about the feeling. Life moved on. College in Austin, a marketing job that paid too little and drained too much, a string of relationships that never stuck. Eventually, she moved back to Burnett to help care for her father, who was slipping away day by day. He didn't speak much anymore, just sat in the den, staring at the television whether it was on or off. Sometimes she caught him whispering. Always to the floor. When he died, she found the old notebook. It was tucked behind the couch, buried beneath newspapers and dust. A cheap spiral-bound thing filled with his shaky handwriting. Most of it made no sense, rants about hollow places, about the eater in the stone, about voices in the rock that could slip through cracks in your skin. But one line was repeated over and over again, scrawled on almost every page. It watches. Even now. She didn't sleep that night. The next day, she drove to Longhorn Cavern. It wasn't a decision, exactly. More like an instinct, or maybe something closer to compulsion. The park was mostly quiet, an off-season Tuesday. The visitor center was open, the older woman at the desk chipper and sunspun, asking if Shelby wanted to join the last tour of the day. She said no. She'd explore on her own. The woman raised an eyebrow. It's not really recommended to go in without a guide. Shelby smiled tightly. I've been here before. The woman hesitated, then handed her a small flashlight. Batteries might be low. Should still last you a bit. Don't stray too deep. Shelby didn't answer. The walk down into the cavern was colder than she remembered. The walls sweated. Shadows seemed to crawl over one another as she moved, like oil slipping through a sieve. The deeper she went, the less the light from the entrance mattered. It felt like sound didn't travel right down there. Her footsteps were muffled, like walking through an abandoned dream. The first chamber was familiar. Carved stone, smooth from centuries of wind and water. Stalactites hung like teeth. She stood there a moment, staring at the rock, remembering her father's voice when he was still clear, when he'd read her ghost stories and told her that caves were the lungs of the world, places where the earth exhaled. She thought she heard something then. A low groan, far off. Or maybe beneath her. She turned off the flashlight. The darkness was instant, absolute. It wrapped around her like a second skin. No light from the surface reached here. She stood still, breathing through her nose, listening. A scraping sound. No rhythm. Just slow, deliberate, Like something dragging itself along stone. She turned the light back on. Nothing. Just rock and silence. But something had changed. There was a smell now. A coppery tang in the air mixed with that deep rot she remembered from childhood. And the walls, they seemed wetter somehow. Pulsing, like they were breathing with her. Or waiting for her to stop. She moved forward. The next chamber was narrower. The ceiling dipped low, the air tighter. It was here that she saw the first markings, not graffiti. Not names scratched in by bored teenagers. These were etched, old, symbols she didn't recognize, spirals within spirals, circles filled with tiny teeth. One looked almost like an eye, split down the center. She touched it. The stone was warm. That's when the light died. Just gone. A soft fizzle, then darkness again. She didn't panic at first. She stayed still. She counted slowly in her head. By 20, she started to tremble. By 30, she heard it again, the scraping. Closer now, followed by something else. A breath. Wet and hungry. She turned. Blind, heart racing, unsure of direction anymore. Her foot hit something, maybe a stone, and she fell hard against the ground, skinning her hands. She crawled backwards, ears straining. Silence. Then a voice. Not a loud one, not booming. It didn't echo. It whispered. Inside her head. You came back. You always do. She screamed. There was no reply. Just breathing. Not hers. Fast, too fast. Behind her. Then above her. Then all around. She bolted, picked a direction and ran. Hit walls, turned, ran again. Her hand scraped against slick stone and she could swear. The rock gave slightly, like skin stretched over bone. Then, somehow, light. A dim orange glow up ahead. She staggered toward it. Into a massive chamber. She'd never seen this one on any tour. The walls were covered in more symbols, glowing faintly. Not painted. They pulsed with their own light, like veins under skin. And in the center of the chamber was a hole, not a small one. A sinkhole wide enough to swallow a car. Blacker than anything she'd ever seen. It seemed to hum. And beside it, bones. So many bones. Not arranged, not ceremonial. Just dropped, shattered, broken. Some were ancient, dry and cracked. Others were fresh, still pink, still steaming. And there was movement at the hole's edge. Something rising. She didn't look. She couldn't. She turned and ran. The walls seemed to close in. The air burned her lungs. Her knees buckled, but she didn't stop. Eventually, impossibly, she saw the exit, sunlight bleeding in from the entrance tunnel. She burst into it, collapsed on the ground outside, gasping, shaking. The ranger was there. An older man this time. Gray beard. Weathered face. He knelt beside her. You went too deep, he said softly. She couldn't speak. He looked toward the cavern entrance, then back at her. You didn't bring anything back, did you? She just stared at him. He nodded slowly. They always want to leave, but they can't. That place, it keeps what it finds. And sometimes it sends things out in their place. She didn't understand. She didn't want to. She went home that night, locked her doors, tried to sleep, but at 2:13 a.m., she woke to the sound of breathing. Not hers. It was coming from the hallway. She grabbed her phone. No signal. The breathing got louder. She opened the door. The hallway was empty. But on the wall, scratched deep, into the plaster, was a single spiral, and beneath it, written in her father's shaky hand, "It watches, even now." She never slept in that house again, but the thing didn't care. It had already followed her home. The lake didn't always whisper. That's what the old folks in Burnett used to say. The water used to be calm, silent, like a still breath held between the hills. But then came the floods, the dam, the drowning. And after that, the lake started. Talking back, Cassie didn't believe in that kind of folklore. She was a software engineer raised on logic and hard code. She came to Inks Lake to get away from Houston, away from the merger that left her unemployed, away from the fiancé who couldn't stop lying, and away from the endless buzz of screens and false connections. Her plan was simple: rent a lakefront cabin for a week, read, drink, maybe hike a bit. Reset her brain. No emails, no texts. Just trees and silence. The cabin was rustic but clean. A one-bedroom with creaky floors and a wraparound porch. It sat a few dozen yards from the water, where the lake lapped quietly at the rocks like an old dog licking a wound. The rental agency had left a few notes on the kitchen table: how to operate the generator, where to find firewood, what to do if the well pump stopped working. Nothing about strange noises or legends. The first night was uneventful. Cassie drank wine on the porch and watched the stars come out, brighter here than she'd seen in years. A breeze whispered through the trees, and somewhere far off, a loon cried. For the first time in months, she slept without pills. The second night, she heard it started just after midnight, a soft murmuring, like voices in another room, only lower, slower, as if underwater. At first, she thought it was a dream, but when she sat up and held her breath, the sound was still there, faint but deliberate. Whispering she got out of bed and went to the back door. The lake shimmered. In the moonlight, unmoving. No breeze now. No insects. Just stillness and the voices. She opened the screen door and stepped onto the porch. The sound stopped. She waited. Nothing. Just the faint creak of old boards under her feet. Shrugging it off, she went back to bed, but the voices came again the next night. This time, she followed them. She crept down the path that led to the rocky shoreline, flashlight in hand. The sound was louder now. Not clear, not words exactly, but something too structured to be wind. The light caught on the water's surface, and for a moment she thought she saw something beneath it, movement, a shadow just below the surface, slipping away as she stepped closer. She told herself it was a fish, maybe a carp, but the water had been still before that, and the voices had sounded almost human. The next morning, she walked into the small gas station a few miles down the road to grab coffee and snacks. An old man sat behind the counter, white beard and cracked skin like old paper. His eyes followed her as she wandered. "You're staying in the Ross place, ain't ya?" he asked as she paid. Cassie paused. "Yeah. How'd you know?" He shrugged. "Not many people rent that one. Not twice, anyhow." "Why's that?" "People say it's cursed." She laughed, more to cover the chill that crawled up her back than anything else. "Cursed how?" The old man didn't smile. "Voices, lights under the water, things knocking on the windows when ain't nobody there. Most say it's nonsense, but folks around here know better." Cassie forced a smile. "Well, I'm not from around here." He handed her change. "Then maybe you should be careful." She didn't go back to the cabin right away. She drove around the lake, windows down, trying to shake the sense of wrongness. It was just stories, small-town superstition. She'd seen creepypasta threads just like it, but that night she didn't drink. She didn't read. She just sat by the water with a recorder app running on her phone and listened. At first, nothing. Then came the whispers. They were louder now, clearer. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone chilled her. Pleading, urgent, sad. She left the phone on a rock and walked down to the edge of the water. The lake was still. Too still. The kind of stillness that feels deliberate. She stared into the black, searching for shapes, and she saw them. Faces just under the surface. Mouths open, eyes wide, staring up at her. Dozens. all drifting silently, some twisted in agony, others with a strange kind of longing. Cassie stumbled back, fell hard on the rocky bank, scraped her palms. By the time she looked again, the lake was empty. She grabbed her phone and ran in the cabin. She played back the recording. The whispers were there, and something else, a voice. Faint but unmistakable. Cassie. She threw the phone across the room. The next day, she packed. But when she turned the key in her car, nothing happened. Battery dead. She checked her phone, still no signal. The landline in the cabin was dead. She was alone, and the lake was waiting. That night, the dreams came. She stood waist deep in the water, surrounded by those faces. They whispered to her, pulled at her arms, begged her to come deeper. One of them looked like her mother, another like her fiancé. Then one looked like her. Not just similar, exactly her. It smiled. Join us. She woke choking on lake water, coughing and retching on the floor of her bedroom. Even though the door had been locked, she didn't sleep again. She tried to leave on foot the next morning, but every trail seemed to bend back toward the cabin. The woods twisted, the sun never moved. Hours passed and she was right back where she started, staring at her footprints like they were mocking her. She broke down crying on the porch, head in her hands. That night, she didn't wait for the voices. She walked to the lake. The water glowed faintly, soft blue like moonlight trapped beneath the surface. The whispers came again, and this time she didn't run. She waded in. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't stop. The faces came again, rising slowly, mouths open. They didn't speak this time. They just watched. She went deeper. When the water reached her chest, something touched her ankle. She screamed and turned, but nothing was there. Then something grabbed her wrist. She struggled, thrashed, kicked, but more hands reached up, cold and strong, pulling her down. She went under. The world above vanished. She saw lights, not reflections, but glowing shapes that pulsed like jellyfish. She saw ruins, buildings made of stone and bone, buried beneath layers of mud. She saw the faces up close, pale, translucent, mouths still moving. She saw her own face again. This time, it opened its mouth, and Cassie screamed. She woke up on the shore, naked, freezing, alone. The cabin was gone. The trees were different. Younger. Her car, her bags, her phone, all gone. She walked to the gas station. It wasn't there. In its place stood a modern cafe with tinted windows and sleek signage. When she went inside, the man behind the counter looked confused. "I'm sorry, miss, but we've never had a Ross place out here." She asked for the date. It was July 4th, 23-2. She had been gone 11 years. No one remembered her. No records. No missing person reports. No name on any lease. Just a woman who walked out of the woods, soaked and shaking, whispering about voices under the water. They placed her in a facility in Austin. She never spoke again. But at night, when the nurses pass her room, they swear they hear a sound. A soft murmuring. Like whispers from beneath the water. They say you can see his light first, a faint flicker, like a candle floating low between the rocks. That's how the stories start in Canyon, Texas. Whispered over beers in dusty bars or muttered by campfires burning low in the belly of Palo Duro Canyon. The Lantern Man. Sometimes he walks the ridgeline. Sometimes the basin. Always alone. Always just ahead of you. Never quite close enough to catch, but never far enough to forget. Ben didn't believe any of that. He'd heard the stories growing up. Everyone in the Panhandle had. He'd even told a few himself back in high school, when he and his friends used to sneak into the park after dark to drink warm beer and scare each other. But that was a long time ago. Ben was older now, wiser, married. a teacher at the local junior high with a house, a mortgage, and a wife who'd begun to talk in the same dull tone every day as if life had drained the color from her voice. When he found out she was cheating, it didn't even hurt. Not really. It just confirmed what he'd already suspected. They were both ghosts walking through someone else's life. So when the fall break came, Ben didn't tell anyone he was taking a few days off. He packed his old tent, his boots, and a borrowed hunting lantern from his father's shed and drove out to the canyon. He wanted silence, space, time to think, or maybe forget. Maybe both. He parked at the edge of one of the primitive campsites, the kind rarely used after summer. The wind was picking up when he set up his tent, tugging at the canvas like it wanted in. The sky had gone that deep West Texas blue, wide and heavy. Shadows stretched across the rocks. Somewhere nearby, a coyote howled. Ben smiled. It felt like the first real moment he'd had in months. The first night passed quietly. Cold, but manageable. He made a fire, cooked a can of beans, drank a little bourbon from a flask he kept buried in his glove box. He stared at the stars until his neck ached and crawled into his tent around midnight. He dreamed of nothing. It was the second night when he saw the light. He'd gone for a short hike just after sunset. The path wound down into a narrow gully flanked by high, crumbling walls. The kind of place that turned pitch black quickly after the sun dipped. He'd wandered farther than he meant to. When he finally checked his watch, it was close to 9 o'clock. He turned to head back, and that's when he saw it. A glow, low and steady, moving between the rocks about 100 yards ahead. It wasn't a flashlight. Too dim, too yellow. Like fire, like a lantern. Ben squinted. "Hey," he called out. The light stopped. He walked toward it. The light moved forward. Not quickly, just enough to stay ahead of him. "Hello?" he called again. "You lost?" No answer. He followed. The trail narrowed. The walls closed in. The light dipped out of sight, then rose again, further down the path. Ben felt the canyon shifting around him, not physically, but emotionally, like a mood swinging in the dark. The silence was deeper here, thick. Eventually, the light stopped. Ben rounded the bend and found himself in a clearing he didn't recognize. A flat patch of sand and gravel surrounded by sheer cliffs on 3 sides. The light hovered in the center, floating maybe a foot off the ground. Then it began to rise. Ben stared, rooted. A shape emerged behind it. A man. Or what looked like 1 tall. Too tall. Wearing a wide-brimmed hat, long duster coat that trailed into the dirt like smoke. He held the lantern aloft, but his face was wrong. Too pale, too smooth. No eyes, just sockets. No mouth, just a stretched slit, as if cut by a dull knife. Ben stumbled back. The figure took a step forward. The lantern flickered. Ben turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached his campsite, lungs burning, throat raw. The trees seemed to lean in around him. The stars above looked too close, like they might fall. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, everything seemed normal. His boots were where he left them, the fire ring cold. No sign of footprints on the trail. He convinced himself it had been a trick of the light. Shadows. Maybe someone messing around, but something had followed him. That night, he heard the footsteps, soft, crunching gravel just beyond the tent. He held his breath. Circled once, twice, then stopped. He unzipped the flap. Slowly. No one there. But in the center of the fire ring sat the lantern. The same one from the clearing. Still lit. He hadn't brought it there. He threw it into the trees. Heard it smash. The fire ring was empty. He packed the next morning. Tried to leave. The truck wouldn't start. Dead. No cell service. The nearest ranger station was 4 miles back up the trail. He started walking. The sun was bright, but the canyon felt colder. Wrong. He didn't hear birds or insects. Just the wind, rising and falling like breath. When he reached the station, it was empty. No vehicles. No ranger. The door was open, swaying slightly. Inside, the room was untouched. Desk, radio, shelves of pamphlets. And on the desk, the lantern, intact. Still lit. Ben backed away slowly. Please, he whispered. The lantern flickered. The air grew heavy. From the back room came a sound. Dragging. Breathing. He ran again. Down the trail, into the brush. Not toward his camp, away. Anywhere but there. He found a cave, small, barely, enough room to crawl inside. He stayed there until dark. And that's when the voices began. Not loud, not angry, just whispering. Telling him things he didn't remember. Things about his father, about his wife, about the girl who disappeared from his high school the same week. Ben stopped showing up to class. Things that made his skin crawl. When he emerged, the lantern was waiting outside. Ben didn't run. He picked it up. It felt warm, familiar. He held it high and looked into the darkness, and the darkness looked back. He's still there now, or something wearing his shape. Hikers still report seeing a man with a lantern deep in the canyon, walking just ahead, never turning around. If you follow, they say, you won't come back, because the lantern man doesn't want company. He wants replacement. The cicadas had stopped singing by the time Claire finished pitching her tent, which struck her as odd. It wasn't just that their shrill songs had faded, it was like they had been cut off mid-note, as if someone had hit the mute button on nature itself. That was the first thing she noticed about Bastrop State Park. The silence. It was too clean, too complete. Even the usual crunch of dry leaves underfoot sounded muffled. And she hadn't seen a single bird in the last 30 minutes. She brushed it off as nothing. It was late July, and the Texas heat still clung to the pines like a fever. Her boots were dusty, her shirt clung to her back, and the sun had dipped just below the trees. She was alone on purpose. After the breakup with Tim, she needed quiet, distance, something other than the hum of air conditioning and pitying friends. Camping had always been her thing, even before him. She didn't need company. She needed clarity. She had chosen Bastrop because it was close but still isolated, tucked away from the noise of Austin, away from work emails and text messages. The 2011 wildfires had scorched most of it, but the regrowth had created something eerie in its own right, a place where the blackened trunks of long-dead trees stood like sentinels over soft, young pines that looked too green, too alive. It felt like walking through a graveyard with new grass planted over it. Something old buried beneath something new. As the last of the light faded, Claire lit her campfire and heated a can of soup. The flames danced quietly, casting long shadows against the trees. She took comfort in the normalcy of it all, the warmth of the fire, the scrape of her spoon against the can, the way the smoke curled toward the stars. But when she stopped eating, the silence returned. Absolute. The kind of silence that wrapped itself around you and pressed against your ears like cotton. She clicked on her flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing but trees. She told herself the bugs had simply settled in for the night. Still, she didn't remember the woods ever being this still. Even the breeze had stopped. Later, lying in her tent, the fire reduced to embers, she couldn't sleep. The silence was too loud. It felt like something was waiting. Listening. She turned onto her side, clutching her sleeping bag close. The air inside the tent was stifling, too warm for nightfall. Then came the faintest sound. Not from the woods, but inside the tent. Breathing. Not hers. A slow, steady breath. Shallow. Patient. Right behind her. She froze. Her body screamed to turn around, but she couldn't move. Her ears strained. Nothing again. Just her own rapid breathing. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe she'd dozed. Off for a moment and dreamed it. She counted to 10. Then she turned. No one there. The tent was empty. She sat up, heart hammering. Her flashlight cast long shadows against the tent walls. She unzipped the flap, peering outside. The fire had gone out, and someone had built a circle of stones around. The ashes. She hadn't done that. Claire scrambled out, spinning in every direction with the light, heart jackhammering in her chest. Nothing. No footprints. No sound. No wind. Just the trees. The young ones gently swaying, but not moving. Like they were pretending to be alive. She stepped toward the stone ring. It was perfect. Each rock equidistant, deliberately placed, like a ritual. Like someone had done it with care or malice. That's when she noticed the symbols carved into each stone. Not letters, not anything human. Sharp, looping shapes that seemed to curl in on themselves the longer she looked at them. Her stomach clenched. The heat from earlier was gone. It was cold now. The kind of cold that seeps through your skin and settles in your bones. She picked up one of the stones to examine it. The forest screamed. Not a person. Not an animal. The entire forest. A shriek of wood and wind and shadow that came from everywhere. At once, Claire dropped the stone and backed away. Trees groaned, bark split. The young pines trembled not from wind, but as if something deep underground had turned in its sleep. She bolted for her tent, but the flap was zipped. From the inside, she hadn't zipped it. She turned to run for the car, but her flashlight flickered and died, swallowing everything in black. She stumbled, fell, scrambled up again. Her breathing was loud, too loud, ragged in the silence. Then the whisper came, right behind her ear. "You're not alone." She spun. No one. But the cold deepened. The trees seemed closer. The stars vanished. Not a cloud in sight, just nothing. Black. Like the sky had gone blind. Claire screamed and ran. Blindly now, crashing through branches, tripping over roots. She didn't know where the trail was. She just had to get away. The forest didn't let her. She ran in circles. No matter where she turned, she ended up back at the camp. The tent stood there. Unzipped now, the stone ring gone. As if it had never been there. She didn't sleep. She didn't dare. She sat by the cold ashes, shaking until morning. When the sun rose, the birds returned. The cicadas resumed their song. Everything was normal again. Too normal. Claire packed up and left, never looking back. She didn't tell anyone what happened. But a week later, she saw something on the news. A man had gone missing at Bastrop State Park. An experienced camper. They found his car, his tent, nothing else. Just a perfect ring of stones where his campfire had been. Each stone etched with the same sharp, curling symbol. Claire moved to Washington. After that, she doesn't camp anymore. She sleeps with the lights on. And every now and then, on cold, silent nights, she hears breathing behind her. The locals don't talk much about Mirror Lake, not anymore. They call it Tyler State Park, officially, but if you spend long enough in the backwoods of East Texas, you'll hear the name whispered Mirror Lake. It's not marked on any modern map. They say it dried up back in the early 90s, but there's still water there. Still something waiting in that glassy surface. Something that watches. Something that remembers. I was 17 the first time I saw it. I'd gone out with my older cousin Ricky and his girlfriend Jess that 4th of July weekend. Ricky had just bought a rust-red Dodge Ram, all lifted and loud, and he insisted we hit the trails out near Tyler State Park. Jess wasn't much for camping, but she was into Ricky hard back then, before the pills, Before the accidents, she smiled and played along. I was just the tag-along cousin, the third wheel, but I didn't mind. I had my own tent, a half-broken Walkman, and enough smokes to feel grown. We set up camp near the Pine Ridge trailhead, far from the other weekenders. Ricky wanted isolation, no rangers. No Karens, he'd said, grinning as he chopped wood with that hunting knife his dad gave him. I remember the light through the pines, orange and warm like a campfire, and the way it seemed to flicker. Just a bit too much, even when no one moved. Like the woods were breathing. That first night, Jess swore she saw something in the trees. We'd been sitting around the fire, drinking cheap beer and swapping ghost stories. Ricky's favorite pastime. He told one about a hunter who found a woman drowned in the lake, her eyes wide open, her skin pale as the moon, but when he called the cops, the body vanished. Jess laughed nervously, poked the fire with a stick and said, "I think I just saw her." We all looked. Nothing was there, just pine and dark. The kind of black that swallows flashlights. "You're just freaking yourself out," Ricky said, but he didn't smile when he said it. I noticed his hand twitch, just a little, like it used to back when he got nervous about school fights or bad weather. Jess didn't say anything more, just scooted closer to him and stared out into the woods like she was listening. That night in my tent, I heard the water. Not wind, not animals. Water. Gentle lapping, like waves on a shore, soft and steady. I thought maybe Ricky and Jess were fooling around near the stream, but when I unzipped my tent and stepped out, I saw something that's never left my mind. Fog. Thick, creeping fog had rolled in from the east, curling through the trees like fingers. It shouldn't have been there, not in July, not in Texas, but it clung to the ground like smoke. And just past the tree line, where there hadn't been anything before, there was a lake. Still as a mirror, perfectly smooth, reflecting the moon and stars like polished glass. I stepped closer, boots crunching twigs underfoot, not even thinking. The surface was so clear, so hypnotic, I swear I saw my own face blink. But I didn't blink. It did. Then I heard the scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. It was like a whisper sharpened with pain, carried on the breeze. I turned and ran back to the tents, heart pounding. Ricky's was zipped. Mine was empty. Jess's tent? Gone. Not just unzipped or collapsed, gone. Like it had never been there. Ricky came out moments later, cursing and confused. He thought I was messing with him until I pointed toward the fog. The lake was gone. Not a ripple. Not a drop. Dry forest floor. Bullshit, he said, but he wasn't convinced. He grabbed a flashlight and went stomping through the woods, calling. Jess's name. We searched until dawn. No footprints. No torn fabric. No signs of a struggle. The rangers came after we finally gave up and drove to the main station. Told them the story, and they nodded like they'd heard it before but didn't want to deal with it. Said Jess probably wandered off. Said people. Did that sometimes. Jess was never found. Ricky got messed up after that. Real bad. Wouldn't talk to anyone. Stopped answering calls. The cops raided his place 2 years later and found him holed up in a trailer outside Lindale, scrawling pictures of eyes and lakes and mirrors on every wall. They put him in a facility out in Austin. I visited once. He just kept asking me if I remembered the lake. When I told him yes, he smiled and whispered, "Then it remembers you too." I stayed away from Tyler after that. For years. Moved to Dallas. Got a job. Got married. Tried to forget. But then my daughter started talking. About a lake. She's 6. We've never taken her camping. Never mentioned Jess. Never told her about Ricky. But one night, she came into my room, eyes wide, voice soft as a breeze, and said, "Daddy, the lady in the water says you left her behind." I didn't sleep that night. I watched her all evening. She talked in her sleep, gurgled, really, like someone drowning. She kept reaching up, fingers curled like she was pulling herself out of something deep. I tried to write it off. Stress. Too much coffee. Old memories bubbling up. Then the calls started. Blocked numbers. No voice, just water. The sound of gentle, steady waves. I smashed the phone. Got a new one. It rang the first night I plugged it in. Same sound dot, and then I saw the fog. Out on my street in Dallas on a 90-degree summer night. Just outside my window. Creeping in like smoke under the door. I packed my bags. Told my wife I had to handle something from the past. She didn't ask questions. She'd seen enough in my eyes to know something wasn't right. I drove back to Tyler State Park. The road in felt longer than it should. Trees bent just a little too close. Shadows hung heavy and the air was thick. I parked where we'd camped. That summer, same trail, same ground, same silence dot, and then I saw it. The lake, again, still, black. Waiting, I stepped closer. No fog this time, no tricks, just the water and my face in it. Blinking dot, and then Jess was there. She wasn't wet, wasn't bloated or decayed, just pale, her lips slightly blue. Her eyes, glassy and locked on mine. You left me, she said. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I didn't know, I whispered. She stepped onto the water, not into it, onto it, like it was solid. She reached out and I backed away. You brought her here, Jess said, and I realized she didn't mean herself. The lake rippled. My daughter stepped out, eyes wide, mouth moving without sound. Hands reaching, I screamed, reached for her. But the ground collapsed beneath me, and I was falling into the lake, into the dark, into the silence. They say I was found 2 days later, wandering the roads near the park, clothes soaked, skin cold, talking nonsense about mirrors and lakes and blinking faces. They don't believe me, but you're reading this now. Maybe you'll go looking. Maybe you'll find a 2 dot. Just remember, if you see the lake, don't look too long, because the longer you stare, the more it sees you, and the more it remembers. They say Enchanted Rock is one of the most sacred places in all of Texas, an ancient dome of pink granite rising out of the hill country, shrouded in legends whispered by the Tonkawa and Comanche long before white men ever touched its dusty base. Some say the rock moans at night. Others say the spirits of warriors who died in battle wander its trails, trapped in a loop of blood and stone. But none of those stories ever quite matched what happened to Meredith Klein on the 3rd week of June, 2022. She was a solitary woman by nature, a freelance copy editor who'd grown sick of Austin's rising rent and nonstop buzz. A weekend getaway to a place like Enchanted Rock, quiet, sun-baked, oddly peaceful, sounded like therapy. She rented a single-site tent pitch near the park's loop trail, a little more remote than most campers preferred. That was intentional. She wasn't out there to make friends. She arrived around 4 in the afternoon, just in time for the air to start cooling. It was dry, the sun low enough to throw long shadows across the brush. The rock loomed nearby, majestic and still as it paused. Slumbering God. Meredith felt an odd twinge in her stomach as she looked at it, like vertigo or a sinking realization that she was trespassing somewhere sacred. She brushed it off, blamed the heat. She set up her small green tent, rolled out her mat, and pulled out her camp stove. By the time she'd cooked a simple dinner and washed up, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The park was quiet, eerily so. No birds, no rustling leaves, no far-off chatter from other campers. Just the wind, and even that felt subdued, as though something massive were listening, Meredith sat in her fold-out chair with her book and her wine, glancing up now and then at the darkening sky. A faint, almost imperceptible thrum vibrated through the ground beneath her boots. She chalked it up to geological settling. Granite shifts, right? The first sound came just after 10. Crunch. It was the unmistakable noise of footfall on dry leaves. And rock. Not the scurrying of an armadillo or the sharp hop of a deer. A step, deliberate. Measured. Crunch. Meredith clicked off her headlamp and sat motionless, her body going cold. Her heart pounded in her ears. She slowly turned off her camping lantern, plunging her area into near-complete darkness. Only the stars above and the faint glow of her dying campfire provided any light. Crunch. Closer. Now, she strained her eyes toward the trail leading up the side of the hill. Nothing. No flashlight beam. No visible movement. Just a growing, gut-wrenching feeling that someone or something was walking the trails after dark. Something that didn't want to be seen. Something that knew how to move with just enough sound to let you know it was there. She stayed frozen for a long time, her wine forgotten, her book resting on her thigh. Eventually, the steps faded. By midnight, she convinced herself it had been another camper. Maybe someone got turned around. Maybe a night hiker. Weird, but not impossible. The next day was uneventful. Hot sun, short hikes, no reception. She didn't mention the footsteps when she signed the trail log at the visitor center. Didn't bring it up to the ranger when he asked if everything was all right, because what would she say? That she got spooked by someone walking? But that night, she went to bed early, tired, uneasy. Sometime after 1 a.m., something woke her. Not a sound this time, a feeling. The kind of feeling you get when someone's in the room with you, even if you haven't heard the door open. A prickling. On your skin, a pulse in your neck. Her tent was zipped shut. No movement outside. But she knew something was nearby. Then she heard it. The whisper. It wasn't a voice so much as a dry hiss, like wind passing through a split in a boulder. But the cadence was there. Intent, message, malevolence. She held her breath. Her hand moved slowly to the zipper, fingers trembling. She peeled the flap back a half inch. A figure stood on the trail just beyond the fire ring, not lit by her fire. Lit from within. No features. Just the vague shape of a man, tall and impossibly thin, his skin like scorched granite, glowing faintly, as if moonlight bled from his pores, and the smell. Burning stone and old, wet dirt. It moved in a jerking, unnatural way, like its limbs were trying to remember how to be human. She shut the flap. She shut her eyes. She didn't move again until dawn. When she stepped outside, there were footprints. Bare, long, toes like claws, leading right up to the edge of her tent and then back toward the trail that ran around the base of the dome. She packed up immediately. Drove like hell until she reached Fredericksburg. Rented a hotel room and didn't speak to anyone until the next morning. She told herself it had been a dream, a hallucination, heat stroke. She even Googled Enchanted Rock hallucinations. Nothing useful, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't sleep without hearing that hiss. The park ranger called her a few days later, said he found her trail log in the bin. Asked why she never checked out at the end of her reservation. She lied, said she forgot. Before hanging up, he asked something else. You didn't hear anything weird at night, did you? Like someone walking? She hesitated. Why? There was a long pause. Then, we get a few reports like that, time to time. Mostly from solo campers. They think it's animals, but it never shows up on the cameras. She didn't say anything. Just hung up. A week later, she started noticing marks on her apartment floor. Little gray smudges in the shape of feet. Dusty. Slightly scorched. No one else had a key. She tried to ignore them. wiped them clean, told herself it was something she tracked in. But they always came back, and they were getting closer to her bed. Something walks the trails at Enchanted Rock, and once it notices you, it follows. It was supposed to be a quiet spring weekend at Garner State Park. Jamie and his older sister Kara had planned the trip for weeks, eager to escape the clamor of Austin and unplug in the hill country wilderness. Garner wasn't just some random patch of woods, it was a family tradition. Their parents had brought them here since they were toddlers, and even after the divorce, their mother kept the tradition alive every spring without fail. This year, though, it was just the two of them. No parents. No responsibilities. Just the Frio River, the stars overhead, and the whisper of the wind through the oaks. Jamie was 19 and fresh off his first miserable semester at community college. Kara had just turned 23 and was between jobs, the kind of limbo that makes you forget what day it is. They pitched their tent at Site 57, right near the old Baldy trailhead. It was a little removed from the others, farther from the Toh River, deeper into the oaks and juniper, quiet, secluded, perfect. The first night was uneventful, and beautiful in that mundane way that only nature could offer. They built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and talked about nothing in particular. Around midnight, Kara crawled into the tent and left Jamie poking at the embers. Lost in thought. It was the second night when things began to unravel. Around 2 a.m., Jamie woke to the sound of rustling. He lay still for a moment, blinking at the nylon ceiling above him, listening. The noise wasn't close, not right next to the tent, but it was definitely coming from their campsite. Soft, cautious, like someone or something was walking in slow, deliberate circles just beyond the fire pit. He thought it might be a raccoon, or maybe a deer. They were deep enough in the park for that, but something about the pattern of the sound unsettled him. It wasn't random. It was paced, measured. He nudged Kara awake. She groaned, rolled over. "What?" "You hear that?" They both listened. Nothing. The wind moved through the trees, like a tired breath, but the rustling had stopped. Kara scoffed and muttered, "It's just a possum, Jamie. Go back to sleep." But Jamie didn't sleep. Not for hours. Not until the pale fingers of dawn reached through the mesh window and softened the dark. They spent the next morning hiking the trails, swimming in the river, and pretending everything was normal. Kara laughed at Jamie's paranoia and made jokes about forest ghosts. Jamie laughed too, but his eyes kept drifting back toward the trees. Something wasn't sitting right with him, and he couldn't name it. That night, Kara wanted to hike up to Old Baldy for sunset, but Jamie begged off. His stomach hurt. His head ached. Something gnawed at the base of his neck like a dog chewing. A bone. She rolled her eyes, called him a wimp, and went up alone with her camera. He waited at camp, tried to distract himself with music and a paperback he'd brought, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sun dipped low. The shadows thickened. Jamie glanced toward the trail every few minutes, waiting for the beam of her flashlight, her voice calling out. But Kara didn't come back. Not by 8, not by 9, not even by 10. By 11, Jamie was in full-blown panic. He grabbed his headlamp and ran up the trail, calling her name until his voice cracked. He reached the summit empty. No sign of her. Not her flashlight. Not her camera. Nothing. He called the park rangers. They arrived fast, 2 men in khaki uniforms and concerned faces. They searched through the night, combing the hill with spotlights, shouting into the woods. No Kara. No tracks. No dropped phone. No torn clothes. At dawn, they widened the search radius. And that's when they noticed something strange. There was no tent at Site 57. Jamie's mouth went dry. "What do you mean, no tent?" "It was right here. I set it up myself." The fire pit was there. The scorched logs and melted marshmallow sticks were still lying beside it. His backpack and Kara's water bottle were sitting in the dirt, but the tent was gone, not collapsed, not torn, just gone. Vanished like someone had unzipped reality and yanked it out. The Rangers exchanged looks. One of them asked if Jamie had taken anything that morning. Mushrooms, edibles, anything that might cloud his memory. Jamie swore he hadn't. They didn't believe him. They brought him into the station for a formal report, took his statement, called in a sheriff. The park shut down the trail for 2 days. They never found Kara. They never found the tent. Jamie's mother drove down from Austin and picked him up. She cried the whole drive home. Jamie sat in silence, staring out the window, trying to make sense of it. The park officials blamed a misstep. They theorized Kara fell somewhere off the trail, an unseen ledge or a patch of loose rocks. They said animals probably got to her before the search teams could. But Jamie knew better. The tent came back a week later. A hiker found it standing right where it had been, perfectly intact, as if nothing had ever happened. Kara's sleeping bag was inside. Her sandals were lined up neatly near the flap. Her flashlight lay on top of her pillow. Still working. Still full battery, but there was something wrong with the fabric. The nylon had turned brittle, discolored. In places, like it had been exposed to extreme heat or radiation. The seams were warped, bulging at odd angles as though something inside had tried to push its way out. And inside the tent, on the inside of the back wall, were 3 words written, in what looked like charcoal or maybe something darker. Still not enough. They tested the handwriting. It matched Kara's. Jamie doesn't go camping anymore. He moved to Chicago and refuses to talk about what happened. Won't do interviews. Doesn't return emails from journalists or podcasters. When people bring up Garner State Park, he just shakes his head and walks away. But every spring, on the anniversary of Kara's disappearance, he wakes up to find dirt on his apartment floor, river pebbles in the kitchen sink. And just once he swore he heard Kara's voice whispering his name from inside the closet. He doesn't open that closet anymore. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right through the alley behind his building, he smells marshmallows burning. It started with a soft rustle in the oaks above him, a sound so natural and faint that Robert Parrish barely noticed it. He had driven out to Lost Maple State Natural Area to clear his mind, to get away from Austin's constant buzz of traffic and stress and sirens. His divorce had been finalized a week ago. He hadn't told anyone he was coming out here. He didn't want pity. He didn't want advice. He just wanted silence. The park was nearly empty, an oddity, given that it was. Mid-October and the maples were just starting to turn, drawing photographers and hikers from all over the state. But that weekend, something felt off. The ranger at the gate had mumbled something about a missing boy, wouldn't elaborate. Just warned Robert to stick to the trails and not hike after sundown. His eyes had been red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept. Robert didn't plan on staying long. Just a day hike through the East Trail, camp one night under the stars, then back to the mess of his life. He set up camp in a remote spot tucked near a dry creek bed, nestled among dense trees. It was quiet, eerily so, no bird song, no insects, just wind whispering through the high branches. That night the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. He couldn't sleep. The shadows the fire cast stretched impossibly far, the trees watching him, unmoving, unmoved. Then came the sound again, rustling above, but not wind, not animals. It had rhythm, intention, a shifting of weight. He turned his headlamp upward but saw only leaves and branches. Still, a feeling wormed its way into his gut, something primal. He was being watched. He convinced himself it was nothing, whined, raccoons, squirrels, and crawled into his tent. But the feeling didn't leave. Sometime past midnight, he woke to a soft tapping sound on the nylon above his face. Tap, 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 like fingers. Or claws. He froze, heart thudding, not daring to move. The tapping paused. Then something slid. Across the top of the tent, something heavy enough to make the fabric sink slightly, dragging along slowly, deliberately. He lay there until morning, wide-eyed, hand clenched around the pocket knife he kept under his pillow. By sunrise, it was gone. No marks, no tracks, nothing. But Robert packed up anyway. Whatever peace he'd hoped to find was now replaced by annoying unease. He decided to cut across a side trail he'd seen the day before, a narrow, overgrown path that didn't appear on the official map. Maybe it led to the parking lot. Maybe not. He didn't care. He just wanted out. As he walked, the trees grew denser, taller, stranger. Their trunks twisted, bark dark like burned flesh. The air grew thick, humming with some low vibration that Robert felt more than heard. He slowed his pace. Something was wrong. The trail narrowed until it vanished entirely, swallowed by underbrush and bramble, and when he turned to go back, he couldn't find the way. He spun around, confused. The trail was gone. The trees looked the same in every direction. Panic rose in his chest. Then, from somewhere behind him, a branch snapped. He whipped around. Nothing. Another snap. Closer. Then silence. And then a whisper. It didn't come from the ground. It came from the trees high above, like breath slipping through leaves. He looked up, and that's when he saw them. Eyes. Not animals. Not human. Dozens of them, glowing faintly amber in the shaded canopy. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. He stumbled back, tripped, fell to the dirt. The eyes didn't follow. They just stared. Robert scrambled to his feet and ran. No sense of direction, no plan, just movement. Branches clawed at him, thorns ripped his jeans, but he didn't stop. The woods twisted around him. No sun, no path. Just the unrelenting presence of the trees and the things within them. When he finally collapsed, gasping, hours later, he found himself in a clearing. At the center was a massive maple, gnarled and ancient. Its bark was scorched black in some places, blood red in others. The ground around it was littered with bones. Small ones. Animal, maybe. Maybe not. He backed away. Slowly, then stopped. Something was standing at the base of the tree. A boy. 10, maybe 11. Pale. Mud-streaked. Eyes wide. Hollow. "Help," the boy whispered. "They watch me. They don't let me leave." Robert stepped forward, reaching out. The boy flinched. "Don't. They're in the trees. They hear everything." "What? Are they?" Robert asked, voice shaking. The boy didn't answer. From above, branches groaned. The eyes returned. So many more this time. Hundreds. The boy looked up. "They're hungry." The next few seconds were a blur. A screech tore through the canopy, not quite animal, not quite human. The boy turned and ran into the woods, vanishing instantly. And Robert, paralyzed, watched as something descended from the tree. It wasn't a creature. Not entirely. It had no clear form. Just limbs, eyes, bark, skin, teeth, a living patchwork of forest and flesh. It didn't walk so much as ripple downward, a shadow detaching from the trunk. It moved without sound, without haste. Robert ran. Again. This time, he didn't stop. Somehow, as dusk painted the sky orange and blood red, he burst from the tree line and into the gravel road near the parking lot. His truck was still there. Ranger's station was closed. Not a soul in sight. He didn't look back as he sped down the winding hill road. Didn't stop until he hit the gas station in Utopia, hands trembling as he tried to fill the tank. The attendant gave him a look, but said nothing. When Robert asked if anyone else had gone missing in Lost Maples lately, the attendant frowned. Every few years, yeah, usually kids. Once, a whole family. They always close it for a few days after, but nothing's ever found. Rangers blame the terrain. Get turned around easy out there. Robert never went back. He never even talked about it. But sometimes late at night, he dreams of those eyes. Not just in trees, not just in Texas. In ceilings, in shadows, in mirrors. Watching. Waiting. The wind never truly stops on Mustang Island. Even on the calmest days, when the Gulf lays down like glass and the sky forgets its fury, the wind still whispers, curling around the dunes, dragging along the seagrass like fingers through brittle hair, sighing through abandoned lifeguard towers long past the season's end. Locals say you can hear it talk if you're out late enough, not words. Nothing clear like that. More like voices, moans, cries wrapped in gusts too strange to ignore. Too hollow to be made by anything living. Jared Rourke didn't believe in stories. Not island ones anyway. He was a mechanic from Corpus Christi and had grown up on salt water and motor oil. He only came to Mustang to get away from a breakup that had split him wide open. When Danielle walked out, she left behind nothing but a note, her half of the rent unpaid, and the bitter scent of another man's cologne on the sheets. He told himself a week alone with the ocean would fix it. He packed up his dad's old Airstream, hitched it to his truck, and parked at the edge of Mustang Island State Park. Early April, still cool, and the tourists hadn't descended yet. Perfect. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. The wind barely moved, but the air felt wrong, charged. Not the buzz of a coming storm, but something deeper, like a dog growling low and constant just outside your line of sight. Jared stood outside the trailer, smoking, staring at the black line of the sea and the dunes silhouetted by moonlight. He thought about going home. He stayed. By the second night, the wind came, hard, loud enough to make the trailer shudder. It howled through the frame like a voice in pain, warping the aluminum walls with each gust. Jared stuffed towels in the windows, threw a blanket over the door crack. Nothing worked. The wind had found him, and it wouldn't let him sleep. At 3:30 he remembered the time exactly. He woke up to the sound of someone calling his name outside. Not yelling, whispering, over and over again. Jared, Jared, Jared. The voice came from the dunes, soft, feminine, a sound wrapped in wind like a secret. He yanked open the door, flashlight in hand, and stepped barefoot into the sand. There was no one. He scanned the beach. Nothing but darkness and the rhythmic hush of the ocean. He told himself he'd imagined it, stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on him. But when he went back inside, the floor was covered in sand. Fine, white, wet sand like someone had been walking back and forth in circles inside. While he was gone, that was the first night it came inside. The third day he didn't leave the trailer. He sat with the window shut tight, fan off, heat rising. He felt it, even in the stillness, the pressure, the watching. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of wind slashing through skin, of voices carried into the sky like prayers being torn apart. He dreamt of Danielle, her eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, her hair whipping around her like kelp in a current. And behind her, something stood. Something huge and shifting, made of sand and sky and nothingness, its form barely visible but horrifyingly present. He woke up screaming with his own voice caught in his throat. When night fell again, Jared locked every window and door. He duct-taped the seams. He played music. He drank. But when the wind came, it came strong. And this time, it didn't knock. It seeped. He first noticed the air change. Warm, too warm, like breathing into a paper bag. Then the lights dimmed, even though the battery was fine. The radio cut off. The temperature dropped. Then the whispering started again. But it wasn't outside. It came from inside the walls. From the vents. From the empty bathroom. From the tiny shower drain. Dozens of voices crying and laughing and murmuring in unison. Jared, you left her. You left her. She's ours now. You will be too. He ran outside, barefoot, shirtless, sand, biting his feet like glass. But the beach was wrong now. Too empty. The waves didn't crash, they hovered, frozen mid-surge like time had paused. The air was thick, gelatinous. The stars overhead shimmered like they were underwater. And then he saw her. Danielle, standing at the edge of the dunes, hair in her face, clothes shredded by wind that wasn't touching anything else. Her feet hovered just above the sand. He ran. To her, tears springing to his eyes, joy bubbling from someplace too deep to question. But she didn't move. Her mouth was open. Too wide. Her jaw cracked unnaturally, chin to chest, teeth gaping like a shark's. Wind poured from her throat like a gale, screaming with the voices of 100 dead tongues. The moment he reached her, it hit him slamming into his chest, knocking him backwards through the air. He hit the sand hard, dazed, coughing up grains that had forced their way into his lungs. He couldn't get up. The sand pulled him down. Slowly. Like quicksand with hands. He clawed, cried out, but every movement brought more voices, louder wind, more of that awful, consuming pressure inside his skull. You hear us now, they said. You're part of it now. She brought you. Before the wind ripped into his eyes, before it filled his mouth and tore the scream from his throat, he saw the airstream collapse on itself like a crushed can, metal shrieking under pressure from something. That wasn't touching it. And above it all, rising from the dunes, was a figure. No, not one. Many, stacked, twisting. A spiral of bodies and sand and eyes with no lids, all swirling in the center of the wind's fury. Watching. Waiting. Then everything went black. They found the airstream 4 days later. Flattened. No footprints. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Just sand inside. Everywhere. In the cupboards. In the light sockets. Piled knee-deep in the tub. And a name carved into the inside of the trailer wall over and over again, as if scratched in with broken fingernails. Jared. 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 No one camps on Mustang Island alone anymore. The rangers tell stories in hushed tones about the ghost of the Gulf. A wind that possesses you, pulls you into the dunes, makes you part of its scream. And if you listen closely at night, the wind doesn't just moan anymore. It whispers. It remembers. And sometimes it calls you by name. The wind had gone still by the time they reached the clearing beside Lake Bob Sandlin, that glassy stretch of water tucked between the trees like a forgotten shard of sky. It was late October, and the air held that dry crackle that always came before East Texas turned cold. 5 friends, all in their late 20s, had made the trip from Dallas for one last weekend before life pulled them further apart. Henry, the ringleader, had grown up not far from here, always talking up the beauty of the lake, the thick pine forests, the endless sky. He swore he'd seen strange lights dancing over the water when he was younger, but no one really listened back then. They sure weren't listening now. Just wait till you hear the coyotes, Henry said as they unpacked their gear. They sound close enough to breathe on your neck. Great, muttered Nikki, rolling her eyes and pulling her jacket tighter around her. She hated camping, but her boyfriend Sean loved it, and this was his crew, so she smiled and went along. There was Henry with his growing beer gut and loud laugh. Trina, who had dated Henry on and off since high school and now seemed to just hang around him out of inertia. And Marcus, the quiet one, eyes always scanning, hands always in his hoodie pocket. They pitched 2 tents a few dozen feet from the lakeshore, right at the edge where the trees began to thin. Henry built the fire, pit himself from broken stones and old bricks. He said, "We're still lying around from the cabins that used to stand here back in the 50s. This spot has history," he said, striking the match. "People used to come out here in the summers, before the flood took it all away." "What flood?" asked Trina, setting up the cooler. Henry didn't look up. "Big storm in '59. Washed out half the lakeside cabins. Some of them were never found. That's why they say the lake ain't natural. The water swallowed what it wanted," Nicky groaned. "Don't start with that again." But as the fire caught and the sun dipped behind the treetops, everyone quieted. The crackling logs seemed too loud in the stillness. Even the birds had gone quiet, and a damp, earthy smell had risen from the soil like the ground itself had exhaled something long buried. They roasted hot dogs, drank too much, and told dumb stories until the fire died down to orange embers. That's when Henry stood and said, "Y'all want to hear the real reason this place gives me the chills?" "No," said Nicky, but he kept going. "There's this story my granddad used to tell. Said back in the day, long before they built the park, this was sacred ground for the Caddo. They'd hold a ceremony once a year under the blood moon right around now, October time. Said they'd light a fire near the water, offer up smoke and meat, and pray to the spirits to keep the land fertile and the game plentiful. But then the settlers came, and they didn't care about any of that. They chopped the trees, built cabins, dammed the streams. The Caddo tried to warn them, said the lake would take what it needed if it was disturbed." Trina snorted. "So what? Now it eats campers?" Henry nodded solemnly. "Every few years, someone vanishes out here. Search parties find the campsite. Still warm, tent zipped, no sign of struggle. But the fire's always cold, like it's been out for days." "You're so full of shit," Sean laughed. But the wind had picked up again, and the fire hissed like it heard something it didn't like. They turned in a little while later. The woods felt tight, like they were closing in. The air had a damp chill that clung to skin. Nicky and Sean zipped themselves in, but she kept her headlamp on for a while, eyes scanning the nylon walls like they might cave in. "You hear that?" she whispered. Sean mumbled, half asleep. "Just frogs." But she didn't think frogs made that dry clicking noise, or the faint whispering sound that drifted in with the wind too low to understand, too sharp to ignore. It wasn't until morning that things started to unravel. Trina was gone. Her tent flap hung open, her sleeping bag still inside, warm too. The touch. No footprints led away, no drag marks. It was like she'd dissolved. "Maybe she had to pee," Henry said, though his voice lacked confidence. They split up to search, combing the brush, the shore, calling her name. Nothing. By afternoon, they gave up and called the rangers. But they never came. Henry's phone was dead. So was Nicky's. So was Marcus's, though he didn't seem surprised. "Maybe we should drive to the station," Sean said, but the keys were gone. And Henry swore he'd left them in his jacket. "We didn't hear a car," Nicky said. "She didn't take it," Marcus added. "I was awake when she disappeared. That made them all stop." "You were awake?" Henry asked. "Why didn't you say anything?" Marcus looked at them slowly, like the effort of focusing on one face at a time was painful. "She was talking to someone by the fire, but it wasn't lit," Henry scoffed. "Bullshit." "There was no light," Marcus said, eyes flat. "Just her face glowing, like the fire was there, but only for her." The silence after that was thick. They tried to leave that afternoon, walking the gravel trail toward the main road. After half an hour, they ended up back at the lake. Nicky cried, Sean kicked at the coals in the fire pit, which were cold despite the fire they'd stoked just that morning. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat by the unlit pit, eyes scanning the tree line, the water. Marcus didn't speak again. He just stared into the dark. Sometime around 2 a.m., Nicky saw the glow. Not from their fire, which they hadn't touched, but from the trees across the lake. Soft orange flickers, like torches swaying, rising and falling in rhythm. Figures moved between the trunks, tall, spindly shapes that didn't walk so much as slide, like smoke in human form. One of them raised an arm, beckoning. Sean stood. "It's her," he said. "Don't," Nicky whispered, grabbing his wrist. "Don't go." But he pulled free and walked toward the lake. Not fast, not slow, just steady. As if he wasn't in control anymore. He walked right into the water. Not up to his knees, not waiting. Just in, like the lake opened and took him. 1 second there, the next gone, no splash, no sound. Nicky screamed. Henry tried to drag her back to the tents. But Marcus was already gone. They made it through the night somehow. Nicky shaking, Henry mumbling, staring into nothing. The fire never lit again. Even with dry wood and matches, it refused to catch Dot. In the morning, they packed in silence. But the trail still looped back. Every direction led to the same clearing. Henry gave up first. Sat by the stone ring and stared at the cold ash. "I think we're already dead," he said. Nicky didn't respond. She stared at the lake, which shimmered in the daylight, calm, still, almost beautiful. A soft breeze rippled the surface. Then she saw the faces, just beneath the water. Watching, smiling, waiting. The first time Dean saw her, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. He'd been driving his RV down to Martin Dies Jr. State Park, chasing a last-minute solitude retreat before the sweltering East Texas summer hit its cruel peak. Park was quiet that week. Only a handful of campers had checked in. He liked that. The fewer people around, the fewer chances someone would try to strike up conversation. Dean wasn't a people person. Hadn't been for years. Not since the accident. He parked near the Walnut Ridge unit, away from the families and weekend hikers, and chose a spot facing the water. The trees loomed around him like silent, crooked sentries. He spent the day walking the trails and swatting at mosquitoes. When night fell, he lit a fire and opened a bottle of cheap bourbon. The heat hadn't let up, even as the sun dipped behind the lake. Everything felt heavy, like the woods themselves were sweating. It was sometime after midnight when he saw her, just past the tree line, standing still. She was pale glowing, almost, but not from any source of light Dean could see. Her skin shimmered faintly, like the way a fish does when it catches sunlight underwater. She wasn't wearing shoes, and her dress looked like it belonged to another time. Old, stained, torn at the hem. Dean blinked, and she was gone. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he tried to shake it off. Figured maybe he'd had too much bourbon, or maybe the dark was playing tricks on his mind. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about her. That face. Those empty, pale eyes. She hadn't looked angry or sad just. Hollow. Later that afternoon, he wandered over to the park office and asked the ranger, a tired-looking woman named Ellen, if there were any local legends about the area. She raised an eyebrow. "You mean like ghosts?" "Yeah, something like that," she shrugged. "You're in East Texas. Pick any patch of woods and you'll find a story. But this one's different. A woman, pale, wearing an old dress. No shoes." Her face changed. Not much. Just a flicker of something tightness around the eyes. She looked down at her desk. "Some folks say they've seen her. Never anything clear. Just glimpses. She's been around a long time, if you believe in that sort of thing." "What happened to her?" Ellen shook her head. "Nobody knows. Some say she drowned. Others say she was murdered by her husband back when this land was still farmland. Left her body to rot in the woods. Her spirit never moved on. Still waiting, maybe. Looking. Dean didn't press her. The ranger had already said more than he'd expected. He thanked her and left. That night he didn't drink. He sat in the dark by his fire, eyes scanning the woods. The sounds of insects and frogs filled the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or hoot of an owl. Around 2 a.m. she returned, closer this time. He saw her more clearly. Her skin was slick with something mud, maybe, or algae, and her hair hung down in clumps. Her hands twitched at her sides. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. She tilted her head as if curious and then turned and slipped back into the woods without a sound. The following day, he found her footprints in the mud behind his RV, bare, narrow, and pointing directly toward where he had been sitting. He packed his things in a hurry, but something kept him from leaving. He didn't know what it was. Guilt, maybe. Or something deeper. Something primal. Dean stayed another night. This time, he brought a camera. He sat with it in his lap, hands trembling as the sun disappeared behind the trees. The air felt thick. The silence came earlier than usual. Even the frogs seemed afraid to croak when she appeared. She was inches from the fire. Dean gasped, dropping the camera. Her eyes were bottomless. Not black, just void. The glow came from her skin, not from within. Like a corpse that had absorbed radiation. He saw her mouth move. Her lips didn't part much, but he heard the voice all the same. You left her. Dean's blood turned too. Ice. No, he whispered. I didn't. You let her drown. His heart was a drum pounding against the cage of his ribs. I tried. I went in after her. You left her, she repeated, louder now. The words weren't sound. Exactly. They were inside him. Inside his bones. Then he remembered. The lake, the other woman. Not here, not in this park, but years ago, before the bottle, before the silence. A road trip with Anna, a fight. She'd gone swimming alone. Dean had stayed on shore, sulking. By the time he heard her scream, it was too late. She disappeared beneath the surface. They never found her body. He'd buried that memory so deep he almost believed it had never happened. The glowing woman stepped closer. Dean stumbled back. His legs failed him. He hit the dirt hard. The fire dimmed, flickered, and died without. Smoke. The last thing he saw was her reaching for him and the wet, slimy sound of something dragging through leaves. 3 days passed before anyone noticed he was missing. Ranger Ellen found the RV still parked, but the fire pit was cold and full of blackened bones. No sign of Dean, just the camera lying in the mud, lens cracked, still aimed toward the trees. They say if you camp at Walnut Ridge and you sit by the fire too long after midnight, you might see a woman, pale, glowing, watching. And if you listen closely, sometimes you can hear a man sobbing in the woods. Not far, but never close enough to find. Some say it's guilt. Others say it's justice. But the locals? They just don't go camping there anymore. Not alone. Not after dark. Not since. The glowing woman came back. The first time I heard of Devil's Sinkhole, I was 11 and stupid enough to think the name was just for tourist flair. Some old man selling peach cobbler near Rock Springs told my dad a story about the bats swarming like a black tide and about a girl who vanished in the 1970s, her shoes found dangling on the sinkhole's rusted railing, laces tied together like a joke someone left behind. My dad laughed it off, said the old man probably added a ghost story to each slice of cobbler he sold. But the name stuck with me. Devil's Sinkhole. Even back then it made my stomach twist like something cold had slithered down my spine. 20. Years later, I found myself back in Texas, unemployed and restless, drifting through small towns with a camera and a plan to start a YouTube channel about haunted places. I called it Where the Light Ends, Nothing Fancy. Just me, my voice, and places that didn't like to be remembered. When I told my friend Andy I was heading to Devil's Sinkhole next, he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just looked at me and said, "Don't go alone." I went alone. I pulled into Rock Springs on a dusty Thursday in mid-September. Heat clung to the air like wet wool. I stayed in a crooked little motel with stained blinds and a flickering porch light that buzzed every time the wind shifted. I unpacked the essentials: camera, extra batteries, flashlight, thermal mic, and a silver crucifix my aunt gave me before she died of lung cancer. I never wore it, but I brought it along like a token or a joke. The Devil's Sinkhole State Natural. Area doesn't exactly roll out the red carpet for visitors. You need permits, a guide, and preferably a reason other than morbid curiosity. But I'd talked my way past enough park rangers to know the language. Independent research, documentary on ecological conservation, no filming without permission. Of course not, just notes and maybe a few photos. They bought it. Everyone always does if you sound tired enough. They gave me a 2-hour window, said not to stray past the fence, and told me to be gone by dusk. The bats come out then, they said. It's not safe. Not safe for you. Not safe for them. I hiked in around 4 p.m. The path was narrow and framed with scrubby juniper and mesquite, and the sun kept ducking behind clouds like it didn't want to see what was coming. When I finally reached the overlook, I felt it immediately, the stillness. The way the sound dropped out of the air like someone had turned off the world. No wind. No birds. No insects. Just the hollow breath of the land exhaling from a hole in the earth. The sinkhole was deeper than it looked in pictures. A yawning black mouth carved into limestone, ancient and hungry. I leaned over the rail and dropped a rock. I never heard it hit bottom. I set up my camera. Nothing fancy, just a wide shot with a mic pointed down into the pit. I spoke into the lens about the history, the legends, the girl who vanished, the whispers that said she wasn't the only one. My voice sounded wrong in the stillness, too loud and too alive. Then, without warning, my camera cut off. Dead battery, though it had been fully charged an hour ago. I reached for the backup. Dead too. I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to places like this. I packed everything and started to leave. That's when I heard it, a sound like scraping, like something long and thin dragging itself along rock. I froze. It came from the pit. I moved back to the edge, hard punching the inside of my ribs. I told myself it was a bat or a snake, something natural. But it wasn't. The sound was steady, deliberate. It was getting closer, and it wasn't echoing like it should have. It was crawling up. I backed away. And then I heard a voice. Soft, feminine, singing. No words, just a tune. Sweet and sad. The way a lullaby turns sour when you realize no one's there to wake you up. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms. The dirt shifted under my boots. I swear the path twisted while I moved, like the land itself was trying to keep me near. But I didn't stop until I saw my truck and the long gray bones of the motel beyond it. That night, I lay in bed with the crucifix clenched in one hand and the light on. I told myself I was done, that I'd go home in the morning, maybe do a story on haunted diners instead. But around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering coming from the bathroom. I thought maybe the TV had turned itself on. It hadn't. The room was dead quiet, except for the bathroom, except for the voice. Same tune. I approached the door. It was cracked open, just wide enough. The whispering stopped, and then something knocked on the other side of the door. Once. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The mirror on the bathroom wall began to fog over. My breath hitched. I wasn't breathing, but something else was in the fog. A shape began to form. A handprint. Long fingers. Too long. Then another. And another. I ran out of the motel barefoot and didn't stop until I reached the truck. I slept in the cab, engine running, cross around my neck. Next morning, I drove straight to the ranger station and told them everything. One of them, a woman, in her 50s with a face carved from sun and years, listened quietly. Then she asked me, "Did she sing to you?" I didn't answer. She nodded like I had. "You need to leave," she said, "before she starts calling your name." I asked who she was talking about. She didn't answer. I drove until I ran out of road. I deleted the footage, sold the camera, shut down the channel. I changed my number. I moved back in with my mother for a while. Got a job at a hardware store. Simple, grounded, safe. But some nights, around 2:30 a.m., I still hear that sound, that soft scrape, that sad tune. And sometimes, in dreams, I'm back at the edge of the sinkhole, looking down into something that doesn't end. And sometimes I'm falling in, or worse, being dragged. There's a hollow in the pine forests near Lake Livingston where the trees lean too far inward and the mist seems to linger long after sunrise. Locals call it Dead Whisper Cove, but that name's been scraped off most of the trail signs by now. Tourists don't know it, and the park rangers won't mention it unless you press hard enough. Even then, they'll just give you that tight-lipped, sideways look, the one that says, "We don't talk about that. Not out loud." Not anymore. I found the place through a forgotten forum thread buried under a half-dozen paranormal boards. A guy named Piney Walker 94 wrote 2 paragraphs about hearing singing children in the woods late at night while camping near Lake Livingston. He claimed he was alone and that the voices were close. Too close. His post ended with a sentence. That made my stomach turn. They sounded happy. Until I got closer. Then they didn't. That was enough for me. I drove out with my recording equipment on the second weekend of October. The air had just begun to cool, and a thin mist sat like breath across the water every morning. I checked into a nearby cabin, rusted roof, single, bulb on the porch, and a laminated set of rules that included, do not attempt to swim in unlit areas, and park closes at 8 p.m. no exceptions. I never paid much attention to curfews. That first day, I set up some perimeter mics around the area where the path supposedly dipped into the cove. The park map didn't name it, just a stretch of marshy shoreline that twisted away from the main lake like a broken finger. The trees around it were older, knotted with black moss, and the water beneath the roots shimmered strangely. Even in the daylight, I stayed until dusk, recording ambient sounds and narrating background into my camcorder. Nothing strange happened. Not that day. Just squirrels, distant frogs, and the wind whistling through the branches. But that night, I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of singing. Not music on a phone, not a radio. Children singing. The melody was slow, haunting, like something meant to soothe a baby to sleep, but wrong. Just a little off tune, like it had been passed down by someone who forgot the original notes. I grabbed my audio recorder and stepped out into the dark. The singing was coming from the woods. From the direction of the cove, I followed it. The night was thick with fog, rolling in from the lake like it had a purpose. My flashlight barely cut through it. Every branch I passed seemed to twitch, every leaf wet and trembling with dew. And still, that song continued, soft, rhythmic, and just out of reach. I swear, I could hear words. Sleep now, in the hollow ground, no more light, no more sound. My heart pounded harder with each step. The song didn't feel like it was coming from any one direction anymore. It was in the trees, in the ground, in my chest. And then suddenly it stopped, dead silence. And then something else. A whisper, close enough I could feel the heat of it on my ear, closer. I spun around. Nothing there. And then I saw them. 4 shapes standing in the fog, small children. Their skin was gray, wet like river stone. Their eyes were the color of old water, milky and blind. But they were staring right at me. No movement, no sound. Just standing there, as if they'd been waiting. One of them smiled. I'll never forget that smile. It stretched, too wide across her face, and her teeth were small, sharp, too many for a child. She tilted her head and began to hum. The others joined in, and I swear the air around me dropped 10 degrees. I stepped back. A branch snapped behind me. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the cabin. I locked the door, shoved a chair against it, and stayed awake until morning. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside to find my truck covered in muddy handprints. Small ones. Child-sized. All over the windows, the mirrors, the door handles. Wanted to leave then. Should have. But something pulled at me. A need to understand. A need to know. The next day, I found an old woman at a bait shop a few miles from the lake. She saw the bags under my eyes, the way my hand shook, and she didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, "You went to the cove?" I nodded. She nodded back, slow and sad. Then she told me a story. In 1944, during the Great Flood, a schoolhouse had been swept into the lake. It was small, out in the woods before the park was ever built. The children inside were never found. Folks figured they drowned or were taken by gators. But strange things started happening after that. Fishermen would hear giggles coming from the water at night. Campers would vanish. Rangers would find their tents shredded, but no blood. No tracks. Just gone. She said the singing started around the 50s, and no one who went to investigate ever came back quite right. I left the next morning. Didn't record a goodbye video. Didn't pack up my gear. Just drove, watching the rearview mirror like something might crawl out of the woods and follow. I haven't uploaded since, but sometimes, at night, even hundreds of miles away, I hear that song, "Sleep Now," in the hollow ground. And I see those gray faces in my dreams, just standing there, staring, smiling. Waiting for me to come back. The first time Leonard Blake saw the shadow swimming beneath the surface of Falcon Lake, he thought it was just the wake of a passing alligator gar, maybe even a large catfish. It was mid-September, and the heat in Zapata County still clung to. The air like a wet sheet, the kind of damp, sun-baked depression that made a man want to float in the lake until the sun dipped behind the mesquite-covered hills. He was camped out near the eastern bank of Falcon State Park, the sort of spot most tourists avoided. It wasn't on the maps anymore, not after the drought in 2011 had drained the lake. So low it exposed the cracked bones of the old town swallowed when the reservoir was created. But Leonard was no tourist. He was a retired trucker with a belly full of regrets and a love for places most folks called haunted. He'd pulled his Airstream beside a tangle of blackbrush and dead oak, set up a fold-out chair by the shoreline, and started drinking Lone Stars by noon. His only company was an old fishing pole, a ham sandwich, and the wind, which never seemed to blow the same way twice. Falcon Lake stretched out before him, a vast gray expanse touched by no breeze, no birds, no signs of life, just that same damn shadow that drifted silently under the waterline, circling the cove like it was tracing something invisible. Something old. By the third day, Leonard had grown used to the shape beneath the water. It always moved just fast enough to dodge clear identification, but slow enough to feel intentional. A thick blur of darkness, sometimes long and narrow like a submerged tree trunk, sometimes rounder like the body of something coiled, sleeping, waiting. He told himself it was just the reflection of passing clouds, or maybe a trick of the sun, which burned so hot it seemed to ripple the very air around him. But he'd started dreaming of the thing. Dreams where he stood on the surface of the lake at night, barefoot, staring into the water while the shadow writhed beneath, whispering his name. The whispers were soft at first, almost like breath, but they got louder, and they always ended the same way, with a sound like something surfacing, not bursting, surfacing, smooth, intentional, like a hand reaching out from dark water. On the fourth night, Leonard heard splashing. He sat up in bed inside the airstream, the sweat clinging to his chest like oil. He didn't remember falling asleep. The air conditioner was dead again, and the lake outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, silver and sickly. The splashing came again, measured, rhythmic, not a fish. Not an animal. Footsteps. In water. He opened the door quietly and stepped outside, half drunk, barefoot, holding a flashlight with trembling fingers. The beam flickered at first, then snapped into focus. Nothing but the shoreline and the reeds swaying slightly in the breeze. Then the light caught something. Ripples, not near the shallows. In the center of the cove, a pale shape. He froze, breath caught in his throat. The shape was moving, not swimming. Walking. Leonard stepped closer to the water's edge, the flashlight beam cutting through the fog that had begun to rise off the lake like steam off hot asphalt. The figure emerged slowly. No sound of effort, no splashing now, just rising. What stepped from the lake was wrong. That's all he could think at first. Wrong. It looked like a man, but elongated, limbs too long, head tilted unnaturally to one side like a broken doll. Skin, pale as paper, stretched thin over something that pulsed beneath. Its eyes were wide, glassy, like a drowned man bloated and surfaced after weeks beneath the water. But they moved. They fixed on Leonard, and it smiled. He ran. He didn't think, didn't look back. The airstream door slammed behind him, and he locked it 3 times before falling to the floor, chest heaving. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't move until the sun cut through the trailer windows and lit the floor in stripes. The lake was quiet. Again, the shadow was gone. He told himself to leave. He packed up his gear by noon and started hitching the airstream to his truck, hands shaking so bad he dropped the latch twice. That's when he heard the singing. It was a child's voice. Soft. Floating over the breeze. Lala, come to me? Lala, time to see. He turned, flashlight gripped again in his hand, though it was midday. The lake was still, but he saw footprints. In the sand, leading from the water to his trailer. Bare feet, small. Wet. The footprints ended at his door. He didn't sleep that night either. He tried driving out of Falcon the next morning. He made it as far as the park exit before the truck stalled. Dead, no reason. Full tank, no sign of trouble. Just stopped. He waited 3 hours in the heat before trying again. The engine turned over, but the radio came on by itself. It didn't play music, just static. Then the child's voice. Lala, stay with me. He left the truck right there and walked through the brush, back toward the airstream, toward the lake. He doesn't remember why. It was like something was pulling the memory from him, leaving gaps, holes in his mind where thought should be. He walked until the shadows began to stretch long across the water, the sun sinking low. And he saw them. Shapes. More of them. Rising. Dozens. All the same pale skin, all the same eyes, and they watched him. From the shallows, some crawled, Some slithered. Some stood fully upright and grinned with mouths that opened too wide, teeth like fishhooks. They began to chant, not words he could understand, just sound. But it echoed in his skull, vibrating his bones. He fell to his knees. They didn't attack. They just stood, watched Dot until one stepped forward. The child, the one who had been singing. She smiled, her jaw unhinging slightly as she extended a hand. Leonard took it, and the water pulled him in. The locals found his. Airstream 2 weeks later, door open, uneaten food on the table, fishing pole still stuck upright in the sand. The rangers said it was probably heat stroke. Or maybe he wandered off, drunk, fell in, and drowned. But they never found a body, only footprints, small, bare, leading from the lake to the AIRSTREM dot and back again. The first time Travis saw the man with no mouth, he was knee-deep in Village Creek, pulling out a beer can wedged between two moss-covered stones. He thought it was just the way the shadows fell, maybe a trick of the sunlight through the canopy, or some weird optical illusion stirred up by the murky water. The man had been standing on the opposite bank, motionless, half concealed by a leaning pine, face as pale as gristle. His hat was old and floppy, more like a cloth bag tied loosely around his head than any kind of protection from the sun. And where there should have been a mouth where lips, teeth, and expression belonged, there was only smooth skin, stretched tight over his jaw like wax paper over raw meat. Travis blinked, dropped the can, and when he looked again, the man was gone. He shook it off, told himself it was nothing. Probably an old ruse or a trick of light and nerves. Still that night, when he lay on the couch back at his dad's double-wide trailer, the image stuck in his mind like a bird just there, just irritating enough to keep him from drifting off completely. Every time he started to fall asleep, he'd see that blank face standing by the tree, just watching. He didn't mention it to anyone. Not to his dad, who wouldn't care, or his sister Riley, who lived 2 towns over and hadn't answered her phone in weeks. Travis had only been back in Silsbee for 2 months, freshly out of a bad stint in Dallas, bad job, bad crowd, bad breakup. He wasn't looking for attention or more drama. He just wanted to lay low, help his dad fix the place up, maybe find work at the feed store or the logging mill. Village Creek was supposed to be peaceful, quiet, but some quiet was worse than noise. The second time was 3 days later in the same stretch of creek behind the trailer park. He was fishing alone, knees bent in the mud, a pack of smokes tucked into his shirt pocket. The water was low and slow, thick with algae and the smell of wet decay. He was half dozing, half daydreaming when he heard something slap the water upstream. A heavy splash, followed by the sound of movement rustling branches, something dragging through the brush. Travis froze, heart thudding. He didn't call out. Just sat there, eyes locked on the bend in the creek. The man stepped into view slowly, like he'd been carved from the trees themselves. Same clothes, same pale face. And again, no mouth. He didn't move like a regular man either. He drifted somehow. His feet touched the ground, but it looked wrong. Like each step was silent, gliding, untouched by gravity. His arms hung too loose, too long at his sides, fingers twitching now and then like dead leaves caught in a breeze. Travis backed up slowly, holding his breath. The man tilted his head. No mouth, no eyes visible under the brim of the floppy hat. Yet somehow Travis knew he was being stared at, peeled apart by a gaze that saw deeper than skin. Travis turned and ran. He didn't stop until he hit the edge of the trailer park, lungs burning, legs scraped by briars and thorns. He didn't go back to the creek for a week. Rayleigh finally picked up when he called again. She sounded tired, her voice distant. "You?" Then back down by the water? She asked before he could say anything. He went cold. What do you mean? She was quiet a moment, then said, when I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, I saw him too. The man with no mouth. Down near the old footbridge. Thought it was a dream until I heard Mom crying in the kitchen one night. She saw him once too. Sighed. He tried to whisper to her, but he couldn't. Travis pressed the phone tighter to his ear. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because nobody else ever saw him again. Not even after Mom. Her voice caught. I figured maybe it was just something in our heads. A family curse or some shit. What does he want? Travis asked. He wants in. She sounded smaller now. That's what Mom used to say. He doesn't have a mouth, so he can't scream, can't talk. But he wants to. So he follows people. Like us. Waits for a moment when you're weak. Then what? Travis wanted to ask, but the call dropped. When he tried to call her back, it went straight to voicemail. That night, Travis dreamed he was underwater. The creek had swallowed him whole, and something pulled at his ankles, dragging him down into a darkness deeper than anything he'd ever known. And in the black there was a face, pale and smooth, pressed up against his. And though it had no mouth, it opened wide, wider than it should have been possible, and something came out of it, a noise like buzzing flies and broken glass. A scream that wasn't a scream. He woke up with blood on his pillow. Nosebleed. First in years. Over the next week, things got worse. The trailer park dogs wouldn't stop barking at night, all of them facing the creek. Kids wouldn't go near the edge of the woods anymore. One old man down the road, Morris, a drunk who used to fish every morning, was found floating face down just past the bend, skin pale, eyes wide open. His lips were missing, not cut, gone, like they'd never been there in the first place. Travis didn't sleep much after that. Every shadow seemed to crawl. The woods felt closer somehow, like the trees were leaning in. Even inside the trailer he felt watched. He finally told his dad, who just grunted and said, "Stay away from the damn creek." That night, he heard footsteps on the porch. He opened the door and found muddy footprints leading up to the screen. But no one was there. He decided to leave. Packed a bag, filled up the old truck, and started driving north. Anywhere. He didn't even care where. But 15 miles out of town, the engine died. Just cut off like someone had turned a switch. He sat there, sweating, watching the tree line. And then he saw him, standing on the side of the road, maybe 20 feet away. Same floppy hat. Same pale skin. And this time, Travis could hear him. A voice in his head. Not words, feelings, emptiness. Silence so heavy it pressed against his chest. Hunger, desperation. Need to speak. He covered his ears, but the pressure grew. The man drifted closer. Step by step, Travis stumbled back into the truck, locked the doors. As if that could help. He watched through the windshield as the man approached, slow and steady. Then the man lifted a hand and pointed to Travis's mouth, and Travis felt it. Something crawling inside. Not physically, but spiritually, if that made sense. Like fingers. Wrapping around his tongue, exploring his throat, prying loose the part of him that made him him. He screamed, but no sound came out. His voice was gone. Not hoarse. Not muffled. Gone. He touched his face. No lips. No teeth. Only smooth skin where his mouth used to be. He passed out. When he woke up, he was in the truck. The engine started like nothing had happened. He drove back to Silsby, back to the trailer, back to the creek. The locals say he walks the banks now. Just like the man he saw, mouthless, silent, watching. And if you go to Village Creek at dusk, you might see him too, standing under the trees, pointing at his face, waiting to trade his silence for yours. It was supposed to be a 3-day escape from the mess back in Houston. That's what they called it, a disconnect, a way to shake off the suffocation of office cubicles, crowded apartment buildings, and the endless, choking traffic that looped like a noose around the city. Mark, Angela, and Devin weren't seasoned hikers, but they were bored enough to pretend. The idea had started in a bar over lukewarm beers and old resentment. Let's go out west. Let's camp somewhere real. Let's see what it feels like to breathe air that hasn't touched an exhaust pipe first. Guadalupe Mountains National Park had sounded good on paper. Secluded, stark, barely touched. But the thing about isolation is it works both ways. There's nobody around to bother you, and nobody around when something goes wrong. They'd hiked up to the McKittrick Ridge campground, a thin trail that sliced up the mountain like a paper cut through shale and silence. Angela had complained. First her boots weren't broken in. Then Mark had twisted his ankle an hour before sunset. Devin just kept saying they were fine. It was fine. They'd head down in the morning. But the ridge was colder than they expected. Wind screamed over the peaks like some wild thing kept just out of sight. The stars, when they emerged, looked hung too low, too sharp, like watching a ceiling cave in. Mark didn't sleep. He swore something was circling the tent all night, crunching rocks under slow, deliberate feet. By morning, Mark's ankle was worse. They wrapped it tight, distributed his pack weight between them, and decided to take a shorter trail back the so-called Tejas Trail, one of the park's main arteries. It wasn't their planned route, but it would shave off miles and hours. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the map they were using downloaded days ago when they still had signal was outdated. Flash flooding a month back had changed parts of the terrain. Washed out markers, shifted rocks. One bridge, wooden and rotting, had simply vanished. They began the descent in silence, each of them a little more tired, a little more on edge. Then they'd admit, by late afternoon, they realized something wasn't right. The path didn't slope the way it should. The sun, hanging lower than it should have been, didn't match their compass reading. The ridgeline behind them looked different now, craggier, with some strange jutting shape that no one remembered climbing past. They doubled back. That was the mistake. They never hit the same fork again. Never saw the same fallen tree Angela had taken a selfie on. The rocks were darker now, blackened, as if scorched. Devin said maybe they'd stumbled into an old burn zone, but there were no signs, no ash. Just silence, heavier than before, pressing on their eardrums until the only sound was the rasp of their breath and the crunch of their steps. Mark began to lag behind. His limp grew worse. He said the ankle felt cold, now not pain, but cold. Like ice under the skin, radiating up through his knee. Angela offered to go ahead, to scout and loop back, but he grabbed her arm and told her not to go alone. There was something wrong in the trees, the way the wind moved. The shadows. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was absence. Like the world had dropped a layer of sound. No birds, no insects. No distant howl of coyotes or rustle of dry leaves. Just that terrible, dead vacuum. By nightfall, they found an old trail shelter, wooden, half collapsed, with an iron ring from an old fire pit out front. Devin said they should stay put until morning. Wait for light. Rhea says. Angela didn't. Sleep. Mark muttered in his sleep, incoherent and low. His skin looked grayer. His ankle, once swollen, was now shrunken, the flesh sunken as if the bones inside had hollowed out. Around midnight, Angela heard it. Not footsteps, not exactly. More like dragging. Something heavy scraping against stone. It moved slow, intentional, from the ridge above them. She crept out of the shelter with Devin's flashlight and scanned the darkness. The beam picked up dust and twisted branches, but then it landed on something, not a person, not a mountain. Lion. It was tall, impossibly so, with joints that bent wrong, legs like broken stilts. Its skin shimmered, not with light, but with the absence of it, like shadows had thickened to form a body. And it watched her, its face, or where its face should be tilted just slightly. Curious. Angela froze. It didn't move. But behind her, Mark let out a groan, a long, painful exhale. When she turned back, he was standing now, not limping, not moaning, just standing, staring at the tree line. His eyes were glassy, mouth slack. Devin shouted something Angela couldn't make it out, and then they were running, downhill, through rocks and dust and thorns. The creature never followed, at least not in the way you'd expect. It was always just ahead of them, flickering between trees, waiting around bends, making sure they knew they weren't lost, so, much as lead. When they stopped to catch breath near a narrow draw, Mark collapsed. His entire leg, was mottled and black now. The veins pulsed under his skin like worms. Devin said they had to amputate. Angela Mark begged them to leave him, not in words, but with his eyes. His hand clutched Angela's wrist, and he whispered something. It's not a place. It's not a thing. It's the mountain itself. It doesn't want us to leave. They left him by a rock overhang, wrapped him in a thermal blanket. Devin cried. The whole time, they hiked nonstop for hours. Maybe it was hours. Time had gone strange. The sun had dipped, but then hovered in a kind of sickly twilight. Trees they passed began to look the same, over and over. One of them had a slash down the middle, a deep gouge like from a claw. They passed it 4 times. Angela started mumbling, repeating the same phrase, "We're not walking down. We're walking in." Devin tried to slap her, to snap her out of it. That's when Angela shoved him, hard. He stumbled, hit his head on a rock, and didn't get up. Angela didn't even look back. Trail opened up eventually. Just ended. Not to a parking lot, not to a ranger station. Just a flat expanse of rock that dropped into fog. Thick, white fog that seemed to pour up from the canyon floor. And in the fog, figures, walking, hunched, shivering, like lost hikers. Still trying to find a way out, Angela walked toward them. She never screamed. Not once. Days later, a rescue team found Devin alive, barely crawling toward Pine Springs campground. He kept saying one word over and over, hollow. They never found Angela. They found Mark's blanket, shredded. No other remains. Park rangers quietly rerouted the Tejas Trail later that year. Claimed storm damage, erosion. But the locals, they say the mountain has its own rules. And sometimes, when the air goes still and the shadows fall wrong, you can hear footsteps, even if you're alone. And sometimes, hikers come back changed. Quiet, hollow-eyed, like something inside them didn't quite return. And sometimes, they don't come back at all. They told stories about the pines near the falls, how the wind there didn't just blow, it whispered. Not like a breeze through leaves, but like something alive, something talking, something waiting. Randy didn't believe in ghost tales, much less in talking trees, but he needed a break from Austin. His girlfriend had just left him. Work had been slow, and he hadn't been sleeping. His buddy Eric swore Pedernales Falls State Park had the kind of peace that could clear a man's head. That's what Randy was hoping for when he pulled his old F-150 off Ranch Road 2766 and parked just past the visitor center. The sun was low, bleeding orange across the limestone, casting long shadows through the pine clusters that gathered deeper in the hills. He hiked in with nothing but a backpack, a flashlight, 2 bottles of water, and a small tent. No GPS, no cell signal, no backup plan. He liked it that way. The pines stood tall like sentinels, trunks dark and narrow, their green tops swaying gently, but only the tops. Down below, everything felt unnaturally still. Silent dot, he picked a spot just above the riverbank where the falls spilled over tiers of stone, their white water foaming like the mouth of something trying to scream. He lit a small fire, roasted some hot dogs, and tried to enjoy the isolation. The night was clear and sharp with stars, the air dry and cool. But even as the fire crackled, he couldn't shake a strange itch under his skin like he was being watched. That was when he first heard it. Not a twig snap. Not an animal. It was like someone saying his name, Randy, very low and deliberate, stretched like cold breath over bare skin. He spun around. Nothing. Just the trees. Just the dark. He laughed it off and blamed the wind. But the wind didn't say Randy again. Instead, it said leave. Then silence. He turned in early, pulling his sleeping bag tight around him in the tent. He tried not to listen, but the whispers continued soft, rhythmic, curling like fingers just outside the nylon. The pines groaned as if something heavy moved between them. Sometime after midnight, he sat up, soaked in sweat. He wasn't dreaming. He couldn't have been. Something had brushed the side of the tent. Something had touched it deliberately. He unzipped the flap slowly. The fire had gone out. The moon shone in patches through the trees. Fog had begun to roll in from the river, thick, choking, unnatural, and the whispers were louder now. He scanned the woods. Nothing moved, and yet he saw something. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then it blinked. A shape tall, gaunt, wrong-stepped between the trees. Its skin shimmered like tree bark, but its face. God, its face had no mouth. Just smooth, stretched skin where lips should be. He slammed the tent shut and held his breath. He could hear it walking without sound, just the soft shifting of pine needles. It passed by. Then the whisper came again, louder now, inside his mind. It's not the trees. The trees are a door. You opened it. Now we see. Now we feed. He stayed awake the rest of the night, eyes wide, hands clenched around a pocket knife that felt like a toy against whatever walked out there. When the sun finally rose, he threw everything into his pack and bolted. He didn't stop to eat, didn't stop to drink. Just ran. But the thing is, he never really left the woods. Because when he finally reached his truck, panting, dirty, and shaking, he found something carved into the "Who'd dot one of us dot," and when he looked into the reflection of his windshield, his mouth was gone. He screamed, or tried to. No sound came. Just the rush of wind through the pines. And even now, if you go too deep into Pedernales Falls, past the marked trails, you might hear the trees whisper too. Not just the wind, not just your name, but the warning Randy ignored. Leave or listen forever.